Another question that I wanted to ask as I'm also going through my questions, one of the differences you mentioned was in KPIs, essentially having a set of tangible goals to track your, your progress, your performance, to guide you in a specific sort of direction, right?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of KPIs do you think would help PhD students developed a more disciplined action plan, as I was talking about discipline, more disciplined action plans towards their own goals, basically achieving the end, getting to the end.
Yeah.
And which ones did you use or have you been applying in your own work that you found to be most useful?
Great question. So one of the frustrating things with like the your judgment of performance being based on getting papers published is that the process of getting papers published can be all over the place. So I have papers that I've been working on. I have one paper I've been working on since the very first day of my PhD, and I have other papers that essentially like came together and were sent out for reviews within like a couple months.
Okay.
And once you kind of get it out to review, it's just like you have almost no control over it, because it's going to go to reviewers that you don't know. It's going to go to an editor that you don't always, you can suggest who you want to be the editor, but you don't always know how it's being decided. And then in terms of what your reviewers will think of the paper, I mean, there's almost nothing you could do. You essentially write the best paper that you can, but you're giving it to someone else who has their own opinion, who has their own training, who comes at things from a very unique perspective. And that means that your paper can keep getting rejected over and over again, even though you think it's a really good paper. So
yeah.
One of the professors at Columbia, Daniel Kuhn, he, had got a paper that kept getting rejected over and over again. And it was essentially like it was going to very similar people who were rejecting the paper over and over again. Or, if you're trying to bring a new perspective to a literature that's sort of old or established, I should say, your paper is going to those people who wrote the book on it. And so, of course, they're going to be like, no, I'm right.
Yeah.
Anyways. So getting a paper published, there's a lot of frustrating pieces and steps along the way that you have no control over. So for PhD students, I think you need a metric other than the number of papers published to gauge your success. It reminds me of like the mice who they just feed them randomly. Like it doesn't matter what buttons they push or what levers they pull, they're just going to get random rewards. And like those mice start to lose it because there's no rhyme or reason to the rewards. And that's sort of how I feel with academia. It's like, you don't know like when you're going to get good reviewers, when you're going to get people who really take the time to give you a clear path for a revision. And so you feel like you're just running around. And so for me, and I just use KPIs. I mean, people had a really strong reaction to using that term on Twitter, but for me, it's like, okay, I need tangible things that I should be doing that I can track that will let me know I'm on the right track.
Right.
So I track things like, in my third year, I wanted to read one paper every day. And it's just, that's it. Some of the papers are really short. Some papers are really long. Sometimes it was things I'm interested in. Sometimes it was a speaker that's coming to, speak at Columbia, but just one paper a day. I wanted to sit down and read it to try and stay on top of what people are researching. Writing becomes a big task that people like to avoid because it's difficult. So writing for a certain number of hours, either a day or a week, that's something that I try and track, that I find super helpful at just knowing essentially like how am I doing along, these metrics. And then I think for me, presenting at conferences, it's a great time to kind of push yourself to get a paper to the working draft stage where it's like ready to be shared. And it's also a good chance to like get out there and meet other people in your space. So presenting at, X number of conferences a year, attending these number of conferences, that's kind of like quarterly goals. So daily, it's like, how many papers do you want to read? Maybe weekly, how many hours do you want to write? And then maybe some quarterly goal of, I want to submit a paper by the end of this quarter, or I want to present at this conference that's twice a year.
I like the way you explained it, because just before you mentioned how open the academia is, right, compared to business. And as far as I can understand from you, these kind of measures, the actions that you took under the KPIs are actually making just, you're setting tangible action plans for you, and then you
Exactly.
track them to get you more discipline, and then see if you actually achieved those. What were the outcomes? Did it help me like reach my final goal, which is publishing my paper at the end of the day, right? So we have similar things at our company that is being used by Google or many others, called OKRs. It's basically this key objectives, they call it. But it's the same. You set up a goal, and then you base all your initiatives according to that goal. Then if you're doing something that you see in that quarter are not touching on that goal, then you just remove them, and then you replace it with something like you said, reading once a day or attending conference. Is that exactly the same actually? Okay, posting on social media or contacting X number of people. It's exactly the same thing, but in a different context. So I think it's very relevant. It makes a lot of sense. This KPI, it's basically like tangible action plans for you to move in the right direction.
Yeah, it's just hard, I think, in terms of a PhD. It's hard to get feedback about how you're doing. It's hard to know how you're doing, and I think, you know, if you those are sort of things like reading papers and also just spending time writing. Those are things that like are almost never wasted. It's never going to hurt you to read another paper. It's just going to help you either learn the literature or learn how to write or learn about a new method. And then writing, even if you don't use that, what you wrote, it's just the practice of writing is really helpful, like long term. It's just a skill that you can build. It's like a muscle.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you for that.